calm and expressive and funny. And he's like very down to earth. She said, some people feel like they study Gemara all day and all night. It's like blessed. But on the other hand, if their wife is at home and struggling with 10 kids or 6 kids and she wants them to help her, and she says, I need you to come home and help me. And he says, yeah, but if I close this page of Gemara, it's like I'm turning my back on God or something, right? So she says, this is, you don't get it. The whole point of studying Gemara is to make you into a better person. How are you being a better person by ignoring all your kids and your whole family?
It's really easy to be holy when you're doing your own thing and beholden to no one.
He said like a lot of stuff is like really good. And the thing is that he used to be totally secular. Like, I met his wife, they have like 4 Catholics. So I met his wife, they met in the army, and he shows you on his website, he had tattoos on his arm. It was like far off, somewhere. And then he became like a Rebbe Nachman colored character with his down to his knees. Wow. And so were all his little kids.
Total transformation.
So funny.
Very good. So we're going to move on with the Midrash. So you can have a cell phone now. I can read and translate. It's Midrash in this week's parasha. Pretty fascinating. It's on the topic really of the same fate befalling good and bad people.
The same what?
The same fate. So for fate, like the same end. So for example, this week's parasha being by Hanan. V'atchanan Hashem. So Moshe praised Hashem. What does the pasuk say? By the way, whenever we come across a pasuk in the Midrash assumes you know it, and it helps sometimes to go back and read it, or to even read the whole chapter just to get a better picture of what's going on. V'atchanan Hashem b'aytahi lemor, and I begged God at that very time, saying, there's a bit of an introduction, but basically this is the introduction to a long prayer in which Moshe concludes that he would love to see the land that was promised to the Jewish nation. He'd like to be able to experience it firsthand. So, it's a pasuk in Eov where he says, it comes down to this. There's one thing over which I said, both the perfect and the wicked He's destroying by Hashem. What does he mean to say? Incidentally, there's an opinion that Eov was Moshe. Amar Moshe said, Rebbeinu Shel Olam, Creator, Master of the Universe. Ahati, Hakol Shavei Nefanecha. It comes down to the same thing. Everybody's equal before you, meaning you give the same punishments to the righteous and the wicked. So similarly, you find Shlomo HaMelech said, הכל כאשר לכל, מקרה אחד הצדיק ולרשע. זה פסוק מקהלת. Everything as applies to all, the same thing happens to the tzaddik and to the rasha, which is not very encouraging. We would like to believe that tzaddikim win the lottery and the rashaim suffer terribly. So we have a few examples here. The tzaddik is a Noah. So the example of the tzaddik is Noah. What's the story with Noah? Rabbi Pinchas b'shem Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Eliezer b'no shel Rabbi Yosei Galili Omer. So Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei Galili, said like this: Noah, im kshu yotzei min hativa, hikisho ha'ari ushvaro. Noah, when he was leaving the ark, was bitten by a lion and broke apparently one of his legs. And as such, an individual who has a broken leg is no longer able to, because the sacrifice wouldn't be accepted that way, the sacrificer needs to avoid doing any sacrificial work until the wound is healed. So if you have a freshly broken leg, you cannot work in Beit HaMikdash as a Kohen. Similarly, an animal in that state could be offered as a sacrifice. He was no longer fit to offer a sacrifice. So Shem, his son, offered the sacrifice in his stead. So who's the other half of this pasuk from Mishlei? This is Paro the cripple. At the time when he wanted to sit on Shlomo's throne. Lo haya yodea mignalim shelo. He didn't know its mers, how it functions. Hikisho ha'ari shebakiseh u'shvaro. And there was a lion on the throne that bit him and broke his leg as well. That's why he was handicapped. Unclear if this is a live lion that was, for whatever reason, part of, caged under the throne, or if it was one of the engraved lions that actually miraculously punished him for doing what he did. May well be. Stranger things have happened. Look at the political candidates for this year's presidential election. It's stranger things have happened. Yeah. So that's the story with Paro Nachum. So he's an example where, compared to Noah, they both have broken legs. They're both bitten by lions, and one is a righteous man who saved the entire earth, and one of them was a pretty wicked man who tried to destroy it. Zemet Tzulea. Sorry, Vizemet Tzulea. This one died with a terrible limp, and this one died with a terrible limp. They both suffered from the same issue. Noah and Paro Nachum, who lived the same generation of Shlomo, a different ruler of Egypt, yeah. The crippled ruler of Egypt. So, this one died with a limp, that one died with a limp. Latov, continuation of the pasuk. This is a reference to Moshe, as it is said, Vatera Tokito, who his mother saw him and she saw that he was good. What did she see in him that she knew he was good? She saw that he was born circumcised, which was an indication that he was, a cut above the rest. Latahor, to those who are pure, this is Aharon, Shemetahera B'Ratem Shel Yisrael, who purifies the sins of the Jewish nation. Latameh, those are the Meraglim, those are the spies that Moshe sent into the land. Instead of purifying us from our sins, they increased them. Elu Amru, Shivcha Shel Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe and Aharon, they did nothing but speak good about the land of Israel. Elu Amru Ginutah Shel Eretz Yisrael. And the others, the spies, spoke only negativity about Israel. Elu lo nichasu la'aretz, ve'elu lo nichasu. Neither these nor they made it into the land of Israel. So wait a second. Moshe and Aharon, who spent their entire prophetic careers trying to convince us that we should want to make Aliyah and go to Eretz Yisrael, and at the end of the day, their rewards, their efforts were met with what reward? That they were locked out of the land of Israel and they couldn't go. The Meraglim, who spoke so ill and such evil about Israel, ended up getting punished, and in fact, they were buried in the desert, the same way Moshe and Aharon were. Sounds fair?
And the irony is that Moshe comes as an argument, quote-unquote argument with God is, don't do this because you don't want to be perceived unjust to that.
What will the Egyptians say? What will our enemies say? Right.
So he keeps saying that to God, and then the irony is he ended up having, according to the leaders, the same destiny of.
He met the same fate. So he advocated for Israel his entire life, and he ended up getting locked out. And the Meraglim, who for a very short period were so toxic and so poisonous that they discouraged the entire nation from going, and they too were locked out. But at the end of the day, they met the same fate. How is it possible? How could you tolerate this without getting spiritual out?
He said that the reason Moshe wasn't allowed to go wasn't because of him, or because of something that he did, but because of his merit. If the whole Am Yisrael had gone in, they would have been able to stay and never have to leave. But they were not on that level. So in other words, he couldn't go in because they weren't on that level. Because otherwise they would have stayed as a result of his merit, not their own.
Right. Basically, they met the same fate. A very conspicuous and prominent, and it's a matter of public record. We know that the Meraglim died as in the aftermath of a plague that befell the nation right after their false report. And we know that Moshe died very explicitly and was not granted the right to enter the land. It was decreed against him, and he knew this. that it wasn't going to happen. Nonetheless, he begs over it, he prays for it. To put the Midrash in perspective, there are situations in life in which you're potentially drawn to the wrong conclusion. We started with a pasuk from Eov, and Eov had a very, very bitter experience, and came to question God, and came to question divine providence, and had a very hard time getting himself back on track. The Midrash is not telling you that they met the same fate for the same reasons. In fact, it's drawing a comparison, drawing a contrast, and telling you should know that it's ironic that Moshe, Aharon, and the spies all died in the desert, because Moshe and Aharon fought their entire lives, they spent their whole careers pushing for this, advocating, wanting to make it happen. And the Meraglim were terribly fearful of it and discouraged the entire nation. How does that make sense? That they all met the same fate. You're tempted, like Eov, to draw the wrong conclusion. That's it. To be a tzaddik, to be a rasha, it's all the same. You're going to meet the same punishment anyway. Eat, drink, and be merry, because we're only here temporarily. We're all going to end up in the same place. But when it comes to these particular deaths or torture, there's a few other examples in the Midrash we don't have time to get into. You're bizarrely left to draw that conclusion. If no one told me otherwise, I would understand that, of course. The spies died in Egypt, Moshe died in the desert, Moshe and Aaron died in the desert. At the end of the day, either there's no justice, or somehow that was justice, but it's justice hard for us to see.
Can you argue that there is a difference between they might have to share the same fate in this world, but their reward and world to come would be different?
You could. What you would lose is anyone who doesn't understand that concept.
Right.
I will never be convinced by someone who believes that you give me bad in this world in order to give me good in the world to come, and I come out ahead. I would just as soon tell you, okay, so I'm going to cash out of my options now. Let me live a good, peaceful life over here. What happens along the way? I mean, who knows? But you're missing something huge. You're basically saying the fact that Moshe and Aharon died at a particular time in a particular place is effectively there must be a message that's being conveyed there. It's not an accident. If I didn't know how or why they died or when, I might come to a bunch of different conclusions. But knowing for a fact that the Torah tells you Aharon died in a particular place at a particular time, Moshe died in a particular place at a particular time, we don't know where his burial place is. We know for a fact that he's dead though. He passed away before they entered the land. How does this make sense? Let me put it to you this way. What was the attitude of the Meraglim towards the land of Israel?
It was overwhelming and everything was gigantic.
The land was gigantic, the giants are going to consume us, there's no chance that we can live there or eke out a living. There are other nations that are dwelling there aside from the ones that we saw. We should turn around and go back to Egypt. We need security. We don't need independence and responsibility, we need security. Moshe and Aharon, how would you describe their attitude towards Eretz Yisrael? Towards Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah. Well, they didn't disagree with it. They just felt that with the help of God they can turn it around.
Did they ever give you an indication that they had anything but love for the land of Israel? Did they ever even allude to their desire not to go to Israel? So how did this make sense? You may or may not recall, a few years ago, we talked about reward and punishment in the Morning Muchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. And one of the things that we discussed was midah keneged midah, punishments fitting crimes. And I mentioned that there's a Gemara, here's the example that Rambam gives, of one of the officers at the time of Elisha. We'll see this in Sefer Malachim, who the people were starving. There was no wheat, there was no barley, there was no rain, and people had nothing to eat. They were literally about to die of starvation. Elisha, the prophet, gets up and he says, in the name of God, you're all going to see that tomorrow you'll be able to buy basically a bushel of wheat for a very negligible price, and a bushel of barley for half the price. Historically, wheat traded for 2 times the price of barley because people eat it more consistent demand. Barley you can use for beer, for malt, for whiskey, but not every culture had that. So the story with Elisha's officer is that when he hears Elisha say this, there was no wheat and no barley anywhere in the land of Israel. The only place that it did end up coming from, and this is ironic because this is the source the Gemara gives us for all sorts of midah keneged midah, of righteous and just punishments. Elisha tells him, wait a second. He gets all indignant and he says, there's no way this is going to happen. It's like you're giving the people a false sense of security. Elisha's response to him is what? You're going to see this miracle of God's with your eyes, and you will not eat from it. So what happened was that the Aramean army got petrified. They thought that the Jews were about to attack them, and they left a massive store of wheat and barley.
Wow.
So that was discovered when they went to discover this camp. When the Mitzoraim, the lepers, were outside, they saw these massive stores of grains. They came back to the nation, told them, here, look what we found, etc. So how is that midah keneged midah? Because you didn't believe, you the officer didn't believe in what I told you in the name of God was going to happen, the only fitting response, the only fitting punishment is you don't deserve to benefit from it. Which copies over exactly to the Meraglim. They don't believe in the miracles that Hashem said He would do. They don't believe in the land being the place for us. They don't believe in our ability to live in the land, to fight for it, to defend it, etc. It's only fitting that not only will you see from Olam HaEmet, from the world of truth, that all this will come true, but you're not going to benefit from it. Fine, that's justice. Because they did what they did. They don't deserve to go into the land of Israel. In the case of Moshe and Aaron, the one thing that was most precious to them, the one thing they wanted more than anything else, was to enter the land of Israel. And because there was this discussion, again, on purpose, by accident, one is led to believe this was more intentional than unintentional. Because this was the one super most important thing on their minds that they were interested in and that they struggled for their entire lives, it was withheld from them as a punishment. So the Meraglim died and they were punished because they disbelieved in the miracles that were going to happen. Moshe and Aaron, who were tzaddikim, who were righteous men, who spread the love of God and the faith in God and a respect and appreciation for these prophetic messages, they don't go to the land because it was the one thing that was most precious to them, and they refused to make a Kiddush Hashem when Hashem told them, I'll make water come out of this boulder. They hit it with the staff instead of speaking to it. And so, in their case, for someone on their level, ironically, there could be no greater punishment than telling them, your lives as prophets were great, your prophecies are fantastic, they're recorded for posterity, you still can't go to the land. And you can't go because I gave you the opportunity to sanctify my name in front of the entire Jewish nation, which is the purpose of Eretz Israel. And because you botched it, because you decided to hit the stone instead of speaking to it, according to Zohar, that was on purpose. The punishment that you're going to get is that which you were striving for so seriously. In other words, because you hold something so precious, it's the difference between being punished at a high level and being punished at a low level. Being punished on a low level was Hashem telling them, you guys disbelieved, you guys didn't have emunah, you're going to see it and you're not going to benefit from it. Because you don't believe in it, you don't deserve to benefit from it. That's midah keneged midah. Midah keneged midah for the tzaddikim is on a much higher level. And the punishments are much more exacting. And so, to put it in other words, the Meraglim, the one thing they had the least respect for, and that they cared for the least, and didn't even calculate into their order of priorities, they ended up having withheld from them because it was something that was so precious. They learned a lesson, so to speak. Moshe and Aaron were supposed to know better. Moshe and Aaron, who was representatives of prophecy, yeah, it's great that you love Eretz Israel, but you should know better than this. When Hashem tells you to do something, you do it. Whether or not you believe there's something else for you to accomplish. Maybe the Zohar says, could be they were afraid that if they did sanctify and glorify the name of God by speaking to the boulder instead of hitting it, many members of the nation would have died on the spot as a punishment for disbelieving in such things. So Moshe's thought was, if I can do something as simple as hit this boulder but make water come out of it, I will have gained the respect of the nation, I will have shown them that I can do miracles, but maybe that wasn't the point. In fact, maybe the entire point of Eretz Yisrael was the humility. The Meraglim are a very funny example. He was very humble. In this particular case, maybe what he did was super humble. He was so humble that he actually sacrificed. He gave up on the one thing that was most precious to him, his whole life. He's dreaming of Eretz Yisrael, and he gave up on it to show you what a tzaddik he was. Where he might have hit the boulder on purpose so as not to bring a tremendous judgment against the Jewish nation. And in doing so, he's basically telling you, how righteous and how humble can a human being be? The one thing that I've always wanted, the thing I've been prophesying about myself, unfortunately I'm shut out of. I can't.
I don't understand why the whole issue, if he had not hit the stone, why would the whole nation have suffered?
His fear, according to Zohar, was that this stone is an inanimate object, and I can speak to it, and it'll do what I tell it to. You are animate objects, you, the entire nation of Israel, and you can't be reasoned with. And I can't speak to you, and I can't expect you to do or understand anything that I tell you. So, the Meraglim, who were the lowest of the low, end up getting punished with something that was so valuable and precious they didn't even care, and they didn't even think twice about. And so what more fitting a punishment than for them not to benefit from it? Moshe and Aaron, who knew how precious it is, who knew how important it is, end up being punished because relative to their level, it was a direct disobedience, an act of disobedience against God. If you love Eretz Yisrael and you appreciate what it can do, you shouldn't have made it a bargaining chip. You shouldn't have used it to say, well, if we go, they don't. If they go, we don't, etc. Thank you. So the irony is only in the difference of attitude, where the Meraglim themselves have such a negative outlook on everything that their perspective was worthless and they deserve to be punished. And in this particular way, they deserve to suffer and see what a great land Eretz Yisrael is and what a beautiful promise Hashem kept. At the same time, with Moshe and Aaron, they're tzaddikim on such a high level that the last thing they want to give up on, the one thing they value more than anything else, is actually what they end up cashing their chips on, where they say, if it's us, but then the Jewish nation is likely to be punished because even inanimate objects can obey the word of God and His prophets, and you as people, as free-thinking, freely acting people, never listen to what I tell you. So they're sacrificing something that, was super important to them, according to the understanding that they did this on purpose. And they did it on purpose because, for them, it was the ultimate sacrifice they could make for the one thing that's even more important than Eretz Yisrael, which is Am Yisrael. So the entire nation wouldn't have to be executed and wouldn't have to start from scratch. Moshe says, I've spent my whole life advocating for Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because the Jewish nation is the most precious nation on the face of the earth. They have beautiful, precious neshamot, and there's no way that I can withhold this from them. I would rather lose it and have them get in. Because for him, the Jewish nation always was priority number one. And so he gives up on something super important, all in order to gain something even more super important, which is this nation making it to Israel, this nation figuring it out, having kids, the tribes growing, striking roots in the land, and then ultimately that he was punished for what was potentially, at least, the lack of disobedience. That's the more Kabbalistically inclined interpretation. This is the Zohar and some of the Kabbalists. That he knew what he was giving up on, but he did it in such a way, as heart-rending as it is, he only gave up on Eretz Yisrael, which is super precious to him, because Am Yisrael is even more precious to him. The Meraglim were the exact opposite. They wanted positions of prominence. They refused to lose their positions of prominence by us moving into Israel, and maybe the average level of the nation going up, but their individual prominence and importance going down. And so because they valued themselves more than the value of Am Yisrael, and certainly a lot more than the value of Eretz Yisrael, they denigrate the two latter and end up losing out on an opportunity to go in. Moshe, who is genuinely humble, truly humble, and whose only desire is to help Am Yisrael get where they need to be and raise their level, he makes the ultimate sacrifice because the Jews surviving and entering Israel was for him an even bigger project, an even bigger plan. So according to the Kabbalistic understanding, he proactively opted out and said, go ahead, punish me, I'm willing to face whatever punishment you give me for not doing what you told me to do, which isn't to say that I lack respect for you, Hashem, or for the Jewish nation, or for the land of Israel. And ultimately he succeeded. The nation did enter where he himself couldn't, but he put them in front of, in front of him.
That they were never going to be able to stay there because they weren't allowed to be able to do that.
It sounds, the Zohar says the same thing about Shlomo Melech, that he knew when he built Beit HaMikdash they would ultimately be destroyed. It wasn't going to last forever, and he did it anyway. Maybe there's something to be said for these temporary understandings being valuable. Did he know the Jewish nation was going to worship Avodah Zarah? Yes. Parshat Ha'azinu says it explicitly. While I was alive, you worshipped idolatry. Don't tell me it's going to stop after I'm dead. And then he himself, knowing the Jewish nation wouldn't stay at the peak of its game for very long, makes this sacrifice because, much unlike the Meraglim, he's humble enough to take himself out of the equation. And they made themselves the entire equation, which is why the equation failed. Very fascinating. Sometimes you see a tzaddik who's suffering, a rasha who has it well, or you see a tzaddik and a rasha who are suffering. They say, "Tov, that's this week's midrash. The righteous, the wicked, it's all the same thing." The answer goes back to what I said when we were learning about Moran Nebuchim, the Rambam, the guide to the perplexed. You cannot judge people. Not you can't judge people's behavior, because the presidential candidates are all crazy and they all deserve to have it said. It's not that you're not allowed to judge people's behaviors, their attitudes, their approach. You can't judge from the circumstances, the situations of their lives, what they merit and what they don't. Maybe you lost out on something because it was unimportant to you, and Hashem gave it to someone who valued it more. Maybe you lose out on something because it's super important to you, but for whatever reason it's not good for you, or it's in order to make room for something more important. What you can't do is draw conclusions from the fact that something happened. You won't distinguish between tzaddik and rasha by looking at it that way. So, we went a little bit late tonight. I'm sorry. With God's help, we will pick it up from here next week. Sure.